Greetings and salutations, my name is Zen Fontaine, and welcome back to Zen Talks. Today we are talking about conditioned repression. To clarify what I specifically mean by that is I just mean the social tension and norm that comes with having to buffer yourself when it comes to reaching out for help or expressing how you're feeling. All of us, whether it be your idols or some weird floof like me, go through a lot. Life is a complicated mess, and it has a lot of moving parts. And because of that, we end up in situations more often than any of us want to talk about, where we're not okay. And unfortunately, we live in a society where it's not exactly clear what to do when you're not feeling okay, or how to bring it up or talk about it, or where to go. And that's something I wanted to talk about today. It's tragic how often what could be solved with, honestly, just a hug. Just a simple hug would be more than enough for some people to turn how dark their world is becoming. But because we're never taught how you ask for a hug. In a world where consent is the most important and key aspect to a social interaction, the fact there's no guideline on how to just get a hug from someone is odd. If you wanted to learn how to pick someone up for a date, or how to sleep with someone, or how to ask for consent on getting closer in that regard, there's a million tutorials online to help you find the right words, or how to move right and not encroach on somebody's personal space. We learn that etiquette as we grow up, and there are plenty of times where if you overstep, it's clear, it's obvious, you know you did. But if you just needed a hug, how do you ask? Where do you go? There's not as clearly defined a social norm for hugs. And one of the biggest telling signs for me that that's a problem is one of the highlights a lot of people have when they go to a furry convention and that they talk about a lot is how welcoming they feel and how much they miss the hugs afterward, because they get hugged more at a furry convention during a small weekend than they do in an entire year most of the time. Because it's just a socially acceptable greeting there. You say hello and you hug the big fursuiter. No big deal, it's just another day at a con. But in normal everyday life, most of your greetings are just verbal. Sometimes you'll have like a handshake, but you would rarely hug anyone. Maybe you'll hug a close family member like on an occasion, but most of us don't hug someone every day. You don't hug someone even once a week. Especially if you live alone and you work all the time, you probably haven't hugged someone in months. And that is kind of tragic, because that small connection of just being held for a moment is so important to like the social structure of feeling okay. That's only a small drop in the bucket of the bigger issue, which is it's okay to bring up how you're feeling. It's hard to do if you don't know the social norms, or you're not well spoken and you don't know how to go about asking. Because more often than not, if you just constantly bring up that you're unhappy, people will move away, which is depressingly not what was the intent. Most people who bring up their mental state, it's because they've drifted so far down that they don't know what else to say. They're lost, and they don't have a clear path out of the hole that they've slowly sunk into. I wish I had a clear answer of this is how you get out of those pits, but I don't. Even I struggle daily to just stay above water. At the end of the day, the best thing I can recommend, we do our best as the open community we are to talk through things with everyone. When someone brings up they're sad or they're hurting and they want to talk, even if you can't talk to them, try to direct them towards any of the helplines that exist. I know it may seem out of place, but that's honestly the best way for it. Things like the suicide hotlines are there to talk people through things. They're not the best place. Trust me, I'm personally aware of that. But it's better than having no one to talk to. Because being alone with your thoughts with absolutely no outlet is just a downward spiral that unfortunately leads to some dark places that just you can't get out of sometimes. So while it is true in our society, especially skewed a bit on the male side of things, definitely affects everybody, but a stigma that men are supposed to fit into a weird cookie cutter of push it down and move forward. I would like to at least try to imagine our fandom is at least a bit better about it. But even thinking about it, I don't actually think that's the case. I think that there's a lot of openness and a lot of lightheartedness to the fandom that allows people to express themselves more than they normally would, but I don't think any of it is actually with the intent of removing that stigma of the fact that a man has to bottle that up. I feel like that still applies to everyone, as our society tends to force people to conform, and unless you are actively hitting a specific stride, you're failing. And instead of helping or working through them on what's going on, we just kind of leave them to drift. There's a really telling video, at least for me, that's been going around a bit lately. And I've seen it on a few venting channels on Discords and stuff, of someone just crying on the side of the road inside their car, being pulled over by the police, and them having a conversation with the cop where they just ask for a hug. And there's 3 things that stood out to me in that moment. The first one is how awkward it made me feel to watch it. This isn't me trying to be weird about it, just watching that interaction felt extremely awkward. Because it was someone pushed so far down that they felt the only outlet they could do is literally a police officer they've never met before and they don't even know. They felt like that was the person that they could reach out to for help, and just giving them a hug. While it's touching that they were able to find that source, it's honestly, it takes me aback that like my initial reaction is, this is awkward, hard to watch. Because even as self-aware of it as I am, it's ingrained in me too that expressing that emotion is wrong when it's not. There's absolutely nothing wrong with what happened there. Someone asked for help and they got it. That shouldn't be an awkward situation. It's not like it was drawn out or anything. It happened in a few seconds. But yet I still felt awkward because it's so ingrained even in me that you're not supposed to talk about it. You're not supposed to ask for help. You're just supposed to keep going and just carry through. The other thing that stood out to me, well, yes, that person managed to get help, but he had to reach out to an authority figure, which, at least for me, is an extremely complicated situation because we live in a society where our cops aren't exactly always nice. It's very much a level of privilege to even have that kind of be an option, if that makes sense. When it comes to anyone who's in a minority or even remotely not fitting into the cookie cutter of normal, police are more or less a danger rather than a protection most of the time. And so the fact that they had to reach out to something like that in order to even get a hug makes me wonder, what if that's not an option? Where do you go then? If that person is so far down that that's where they're at, does that person just keep falling because there's just no option at all at that point when you're already that far gone? Maybe I'm reading too far into this. This is one of those videos that I would love to have feedback, to hear the stories or hear how is life on your end. Tell me how you are. I'd love to hear, honestly, because looking at the world around me and seeing how many lives are lost to their own hands because society forces us not to talk about how we're feeling inside is one of the saddest sights I've seen in my life. And unfortunately, even I fall victim to it. And I want more than anything to live in a world where it's okay to ask for help. More than it just being okay, that those involved feel like they can reach out and that they don't have to feel like they're pushed into a box or just going to be blown off, or worse, they're going to be shunned for it or judged for just wanting a hug or wanting to talk to someone. Given everything that we go through on a day-to-day basis and how many people we've lost, I just hope that if you're watching this and you're going through something terrible, you'll reach out. As hard as it is to push through those societal standards, I hope you'll talk to us, honestly. And if you can reach out for the right channels to get better help than even something like me can provide, do it. Try your best, okay? Regardless of what anyone thinks, I know that you're doing your best. And I'm proud of you for it. That video I mentioned had a couple more parts to it. It goes over whether or not someone is outwardly expressing being nice. And I thought that was interesting because it then went and played a sound that went viral on TikTok for a while, which is, what do you want to be when you grow up? Nice. At least for me, that sound didn't click with me when it was playing. At least not like the actual weight of that statement. Despite like the really good videos about it, it just didn't click in my head on just how deep that statement goes. I guess it's because I think I'm doing the best I can to try and be kind to those around me. I honestly do try my best. Maybe I'm not, but as far as my perspective goes, I was under the impression I was, and so I never took the time to look at that from an outside view of, well, is that the norm? Is everyone thinking that? Or is everyone forcing themselves into the idea that whatever they're doing is being nice, even if it's not? Because what is the social standard for nice? How do you define what is being kind to somebody else? I realize that the big first step to that would be empathy, being able to relate to someone's situation and understand what they're going through, and then taking the time to move past that is where you get into being kind, is to alter both your perspective and your actions to take into account the information you gained from understanding their situation, empathizing, and then adjusting for their situation. In my mind would be what I would consider to be being kind to someone. That ties back into that in our society, it's not socially accepted to express yourself and how you're feeling. It's something that is repressed quite heavily. As such, how can you be kind to someone if you don't know how they're feeling in the first place? Especially in a lot of older generations that I know, where they have to put on a mask and put on a show, but that show is deeply ingrained in their personality throughout because that's all they've ever known they were allowed to express. While it's true the younger generation has it a lot more open, you can still see that so many people force themselves to conform to a mold that doesn't quite fit, and so much of them gets damaged from being pushed down. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me ramble about things that plague my mind far too much. If you have someone nearby that's your friend, ask for a hug. It may do more for you than you might think. Even if you don't, if you need a virtual hug, come and get one. It's all yours. Regardless, thank you all for tuning in. My name is Edimus Fontail. Have a good day, and thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it.